Easy English audiobook.
The Last Lesson by Alphonse Daudet. I was late for school that morning, and I was very scared of being scolded. Mr. Hamill, our teacher, had said he would ask us questions about participles, and I didn't know anything about them. For a moment, I thought about running away and spending the day outside. The weather was so warm and bright. The birds were singing at the edge of the woods, and in the open field behind the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. All of this was much more tempting than learning the rule for participles, but I managed to resist and hurried off to school. As I passed the town hall, I noticed a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For the last 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. Lost battles, the draft, and orders from the commanding officer. I thought to myself, without stopping, what could be the matter now? As I hurried by as fast as I could, the blacksmith Wachter, who was there with his apprentice reading the bulletin, called after me, "Don't go so fast, boy. You'll get to school in plenty of time." I thought he was making fun of me, and I reached Mr. Hamill's little garden all out of breath. Usually when school began, there was a lot of noise that could be heard out on the street. The opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated loudly, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's big ruler rapping on the table. But today it was all so quiet. I had counted on the commotion to slip into my desk without being seen, but today everything had to be as quiet as a Sunday morning. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places, and Mr. Hamill walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. I had to open the door and go in before everyone. You can imagine how embarrassed and scared I was. But nothing happened. Mr. Hamill saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were about to start without you." I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not until then, when I had gotten over my fright a little, did I notice that our teacher was wearing his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap with embroidery that he only wore on special days like inspections or prize-giving days. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and serious. But the thing that surprised me the most was seeing the village people sitting quietly at the back of the room. Old Hauser with his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others. Everyone looked sad, and Hauser had brought an old, worn-out primer. He held it open on his knees with his big glasses lying across the pages. While I was wondering about all this, Mr. Hamill climbed onto his chair, and in the same serious and gentle tone he had used with me, he said, "My children, this is the last lesson I will give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new teacher arrives tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." These words were like a thunderbolt to me. Oh, those wretches. That's what they had put up at the town hall. My last French lesson. And I hardly knew how to write. I would never learn any more. I must stop here. Oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lessons, for looking for birds' eggs, or going sliding on the Saar. My books, which had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the saints, were now old friends that I couldn't give up. And Mr. Hamill, too. The idea that he was going away, that I would never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. Poor man. It was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his best Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting at the back of the room. It was because they were sorry, too, that they hadn't gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our teacher for his 40 years of faithful service and showing their respect for the country that was theirs no more. While I was thinking about all this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. What wouldn't I have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle loudly and clearly and without one mistake? But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there holding onto my desk, my heart beating fast and not daring to look up. I heard Mr. Hamill say to me, "I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is. Every day we've said to ourselves, 'I have plenty of time. I'll learn it tomorrow.' And now you see where we've ended up. Ah, that's the great trouble with Alsace. We put off learning until tomorrow. Now those fellows out there will have the right to say to you, 'How is it? You pretend to be Frenchmen, and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language.' But you are not the worst, poor little Franz. We all have a lot to blame ourselves for. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills so as to have a little more money. And I've been to blame too. Haven't I often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, didn't I just give you a holiday? Then, from one thing to another, Mr. Hamel went on to talk about the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must keep it alive among us and never forget it, because when people are enslaved, as long as they hold on to their language, it's as if they still have the key to their prison. Then he opened a grammar book and read us our lesson. I was amazed at how well I understood it. Everything he said seemed so easy. So easy. I think, too, that I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away, and to put it all into our heads at once. After the grammar lesson, we had a lesson in writing. That day, Mr. Hamel had new copies for us written in a beautiful round hand. France, Alsace, France, Alsace. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You should have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens on the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them. Not even the littlest ones, who kept working, tracing their fish hooks, as if that was French too. On the roof, the pigeons cooed very softly, and I thought to myself, will they make the pigeons sing in German too? Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw Mr. Hamel sitting still in his chair, gazing at different things in the room, as if he wanted to remember exactly how everything looked in that little schoolroom. Imagine, for 40 years, he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him just like that. Only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller, and the hop vine he had planted himself climbed about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man. To hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks. For they had to leave the country the next day. But he had the courage to teach every lesson to the very end. After the writing lesson, we had a history lesson, and then the little ones sang their Babé Bi Bobu. Down at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his glasses, and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with the children. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion, and it was so touching to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Oh, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All of a sudden, the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus bell rang. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussian soldiers returning from their drill sounded under our windows. Mr. Hamel stood up very tall in his chair. I had never seen him look so tall. "My friends," he said, I... But something choked him, and he couldn't go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and wrote as large as he could, "Vive la France." Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall. Without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand. "School is dismissed. You may go."